One student walked into class that morning believing it would be just another day on campus. By nightfall, the university would be locked down, a national figure would be dead, and a story would be rushed into the public record before the shock had even settled. And now, 3 months later, someone who was there says that story doesn't hold. Before we go any further, if you support careful, fact-driven reporting that doesn't rush to conclusions, subscribing to this channel helps keep this work alive. And if you want to stay informed as new details surface, turning on notifications ensures you don't miss what comes next. This case is still moving, even if it doesn't look like it. This is not a reenactment. This is not speculation. This is a reconstruction built from witness testimony, charging documents, and details that were never fully examined in public. Because what happened at Utah Valley University that day may not match what people think they know. The shooting of right-wing political activist Charlie Kirk sent immediate shockwaves through the country. Headlines appeared within minutes. Social media filled the gaps with assumptions. Officials released an initial timeline, and for many, that was enough. But for one student on campus that morning, it wasn't. He waited. He listened, and he says the longer he listened, the less the official version resembled what he personally witnessed. According to this eyewitness, the minutes before the shooting were quiet, not tense, not chaotic. Students were moving normally. Conversations were happening. No visible disturbance, no sudden rush, no sense that something terrible was about to unfold. That detail alone challenges the foundation of the accepted timeline. Because if the atmosphere was calm, then when exactly did everything change? The official narrative suggests a rapid escalation, a short window, a clear sequence. But eyewitnesses measure time differently. They remember pauses, lulls, moments where nothing happens, and those moments matter. The student says he was positioned close enough to observe movement patterns that now appear inconsistent with public statements. He recalls where people were standing, how long they remained there, and how security responses unfolded, or didn't, in real time. These aren't emotional recollections, they are observational ones, and that distinction is critical. As investigators focused on Tyler Robinson, fragments of his digital and personal life were introduced to help explain motive. 55 minutes before the shooting, Robinson was reportedly posting about Wordle, celebrating a successful attempt at the daily online puzzle. The tone was casual, routine, ordinary. For some, that suggests normal behavior. For others, it raises a harder question. What happens in the gap between ordinary and irreversible? People who knew Robinson described gradual changes over the previous year. His mother told police he had become more outspoken in support of gay and transgender rights. Friends said he began dating a roommate who was in the process of a gender transition. According to individuals familiar with the household, the roommate was deeply affected by political developments, especially after the presidential election. Messages reviewed by investigators show concern about the future of transgender rights and frustration with the broader political climate. One person close to Robinson during that period said he grew increasingly critical of conservative figures, voicing concerns about economic policies and public rhetoric. None of this on its own points to violence, but investigators later cited a message Robinson allegedly sent after the shooting, words that would quickly become central to the case. "I had enough of his hatred. Some hate can't be negotiated out." That line has been repeated widely. What hasn't been examined as closely is what was physically happening on campus when the trigger was pulled. The eyewitness challenges the reported order of events. He questions how quickly certain areas were secured. He describes seeing individuals in locations that, according to official timelines, should not have been accessible at that point. He also raises questions about descriptions of the weapon, when it became visible, how it was carried, and whether those details align with what was later communicated to the public. These discrepancies are subtle, but subtle inconsistencies are often where truth hides. Meanwhile, people who spent time inside Robinson's apartment describe an emotionally charged environment in the months leading up to the shooting. Friends recalled moments where Robinson comforted his roommate during emotional breakdowns tied to political fears and social treatment. One visitor described a tense incident during a card game when a comment about transgender athletes led to shouting from another room, abruptly halting the conversation. Robinson, they said, remained silent. Officials have confirmed that the roommate cooperated with investigators and has not been charged. Still, the proximity matters, influence matters, emotional dynamics matter. And yet, those dynamics don't explain why an eyewitness account would differ so sharply from the public timeline. The student says he struggled with whether to speak up. He watched press briefings, he read official summaries, and each time he felt the distance between what he remembered and what was being reported grow wider. Cases like this often solidify quickly. Once a narrative forms, it becomes difficult to question without being dismissed. But accuracy doesn't depend on comfort. If you believe questions deserve space, not silence, sharing this video helps others examine the facts for themselves. The goal here isn't outrage, it's clarity. Because what's at stake isn't just one case, it's trust. When timelines don't align, when eyewitnesses hesitate to speak, when conclusions arrive faster than explanations, those are the moments that demand scrutiny. Right now, two versions of the same morning exist, one in official records and one in the memory of someone who was there. And until those versions meet, the story remains unfinished.
That divide is where investigators say the evidence speaks for itself, but where defense analysts and independent observers say more context is still missing. Because beyond motive and messaging, there is the matter of timing. Digital footprints place Robinson online less than an hour before the shooting, interacting casually, responding normally, showing no outward signal of urgency. Surveillance coverage on campus, according to public records requests, remains only partially released. Several camera angles cited in briefings have not been made available in full, with officials noting ongoing legal considerations. That limitation has made independent reconstruction difficult. Former campus safety professionals who reviewed the publicly described timeline point out that response sequences depend heavily on when the first alert is received, not when the first action occurs. A delay of even seconds can change how a scene unfolds. And that brings renewed focus to emergency notifications. Students reported receiving alerts at different times, some minutes apart. Others said they were already sheltering before any official message appeared. Those inconsistencies have never been fully explained, but they shape how witnesses interpret what they saw. One professor told colleagues privately that his classroom was never formally notified, despite being within the zone described later as secured. Another student said officers passed through an adjacent hallway without issuing instructions. None of these accounts appear in official summaries. Legal experts familiar with high-profile campus cases say this is not unusual, but it is consequential. When public confidence depends on clarity, gaps invite speculation. Robinson's attorneys have not publicly challenged the timeline in detail, but court filings suggest they are examining digital data, movement logs, and dispatch records minute by minute. Prosecutors, for their part, argue the sequence is clear enough to establish responsibility. Between those positions sits the eyewitness, who says he remembers watching people walk freely through areas that were later described as restricted at that exact moment. He remembers the soundscape, not alarms, not shouting, but ordinary noise continuing longer than expected. And he remembers a pause, not a dramatic one, just a stretch of time where nothing seemed to happen, a stretch that does not appear in official accounts. That pause is difficult to quantify, but difficult to forget. Meanwhile, attention has turned to Robinson's inner circle in the days following the shooting. Friends and acquaintances have been asked repeatedly about his emotional state, his political views, his relationship dynamics. Some say he appeared conflicted but calm. Others describe increased frustration, though not instability.
Several people emphasize that he avoided confrontation in group settings, often choosing silence over argument. That pattern complicates assumptions. The message cited in charging documents, the one investigators describe as an apparent confession, remains one of the few direct expressions attributed to Robinson after the incident. Context surrounding that message, including emotional state and timing, has not been fully explored publicly. Experts caution against interpreting isolated communications without broader behavioral analysis. At the same time, officials maintain that evidence beyond messaging supports their conclusions. What that evidence includes and how it aligns with eyewitness accounts will likely become clearer only in court. Until then, public understanding rests on partial information. If you're finding this reporting valuable, supporting the channel by staying subscribed ensures we can continue following developments as they unfold. These cases don't resolve quickly, and careful attention matters. There is also the question of why the eyewitness waited. He says he didn't want to interfere, didn't want to misremember, didn't want to add noise to an already loud conversation. But as time passed, certainty replaced hesitation. Memory fades, but core moments don't. He reached out quietly, not to social media, not to commentary pages, but to people he believed would take notes seriously. What happens to his account next remains unclear. What is clear is that the case has entered a new phase, one where the record is no longer uncontested. Institutions rely on trust, investigations rely on precision, and when those two drift apart, the consequences extend beyond a single event. For now, the official version stands. So does the witness. And somewhere between them is the truth. Still unconfirmed, still incomplete, still waiting to be fully examined.